Good evening, everybody. This is our second session for the discussion of ethics mains paper of this year. I hope all of you have gone through the first video. In case you have not been able to catch up with the first one, I would recommend you please do that. You'll get a lot of insight in the discussion of the first class. So, we will start from where we left off. This is the question that we will be discussing now. I'll read out the question in case you haven't gone through the question paper already for your benefit. In case you have, that's very well. This question from section A reads like this. The soul of the new law, Bharatiya Nyay Sanhita, is justice, equality, and impartiality based on Indian culture and ethos. So the answer that you will write, that has to have the shade of Indian culture and ethos. These important judicial administrative values of justice, equality, impartiality, you have to show how in the new law that is based on Indian culture and ethos. Discuss this in the light of major shift from doctrine of punishment to justice in the present judicial system. So there is quite a bit to talk about here. The shift from doctrine of punishment to justice. There's already a question previous to this in section A on justice. If you have gone through that question paper or if you have attended the previous lecture, previous discussion on this paper, you would be very well aware the statement that they have given in the question paper. The concept of just and unjust is contextual. So you have to discuss the concept of justice there. We have discussed the concept of justice, and then I have told you the idea of justice is the idea of synthesis. The idea of justice is the idea of balance. So here the question says, discuss this. Discuss what? Discuss this. Discuss what? Discuss justice, equality, and impartiality in the new law, Bharatiya Nyay Sanhita, in the light of Indian culture and ethos. And you also have to discuss this majorly in the context of a shift from the doctrine of punishment to the doctrine of justice. You have an idea of justice. Basically, I'll give you first the introduction to for our better understanding as to what is the shift here. What is the doctrine of punishment in contrast to justice? You do not have to write about this so elaborately because you have to do the discussion on justice, impartiality, and equality. But the context here is the shift. So for the sake of understanding, I'm giving you this, but you can't write so much in the answer. You understand that? But you understand doctrine is basically a system of principle, a mechanism that's called a doctrine. The doctrine of punishment is based on the idea to inflict penalties on the offender as a primary response to crime. That is a doctrine of punishment. Basically, it's punitive idea. It is retributive idea. The doctrine of punishment is based on retribution, punishment as a form of payback for the offense that the offender commits. It is based on the idea of deterrence, the fear of punishment to deter others from doing the same. It is based on the idea of incapacitation, to take away the capacity of the offender to do further offense. So you isolate the person from society and put him in the jail. That is the idea, one of the idea of doctrine of punishment. Doctrine of punishment is also based on the concept of being offender-centric. Because you're punishing the offender, you're isolating the offender. So it is basically the whole mechanism is offender-centric. It is not victim-centric. It is punitive, and of course it is driven by the state. But in contrast, justice, you understand the theory of justice as you must have studied in your foundation courses. If you have PSIR as your option, you will be very well aware. Even if you have public administration as your option, even if you are a generally aware person, you might know some theory of justice. Theory of justice was created as a response to the theory of rights. Since everybody has rights, the rights of all has to be guaranteed simultaneously, and that is a challenging task. To fulfill the rights, the natural rights, the fundamental rights of all, different kinds of rights, simultaneously for everybody, that must necessarily be a balancing act. Justice has been derived from the root word jus, J-U-S, jus, which literally means to synthesize. So the idea of justice is to synthesize the claim of rights of different sections, of different people. So fundamentally, justice means to synthesize. Justice is the idea of balance. Justice is the idea to address the harm done to the victim, to restore the harm, to restore the disbalance, and to promote fairness. Fairness in terms of the power dynamics, fairness in terms of procedures, to keep the system, society stabilized. That is justice. So if suppose something happens with your laptop, so you will not just punish the person who has done something. You will not just rebuke person. Suppose I destroy your laptop. But the end goal of you is to have that laptop up and running again. You'll get it repaired. So restorative idea is the idea of justice necessarily. The things as it were must come back to its equilibrium position. So things must be restored to the original position. That is justice. Balance must be restored. The delicate relation must be restored. So justice has many ideas. Justice has the idea of fairness. According to John Rawls, justice is necessarily fairness. Justice is synthesis. Justice is balance. Justice is harmony. But the idea of punishment or the doctrine of punishment is not that. Justice is restorative. Justice is rehabilitative. Justice is victim centric, not offender centric. And justice is holistic. It takes care of everything, and it takes care of the balance of the whole system. So justice, theory of justice is evolving. It has evolved a lot in the 19th century as we have understood more of psychology and the psychology of crime, the social dynamics, the human rights theories. They have added, enriched the idea of justice as to have balance. And in that question, we have seen that the concept of just and unjust is contextual. But the doctrine of punishment often try to standardize the penalties. The idea of justice is context specific. Remember that question from the question paper? This year's question paper, the concept of just and unjust is contextual. So this is a brief understanding. This is what the question demands. This is what it is meant when it says that discuss this in the light of major shift from a doctrine of punishment to justice. So with slight use of this, the text given here, you will write the answer. But this was just for understanding. This can't be the part of your answer. You have to hit where they have asked directly. But that has to be done with this particular understanding. When question gives you out 3-4 parts, it's best that you deal with them separately. You should not be clubbing them. If the question has given you justice, equality, and impartiality, it is best that you deal with them separately. Now here, I would like to tell you that this is not a question of polity. Students have been asking after the exam that how to handle the questions of polity that came in ethics paper, which is a little naive to ask actually. The questions that came in ethics paper is question of ethics. How can it be question of polity? The question of polity would be asked in GS2. Since it has been asked in this paper, it necessarily has to be question of ethics. These are not questions of polity. So if just because Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is mentioned, it doesn't mean that you have to look into the different sections and provisions as you ideally will do in your GS paper 2. So this here, you have to take the concepts and you have to take the ideas from Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. I'll not be mentioning any section, any provision of the erstwhile CRPC, IPC, or the present Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. This is not the GS paper 2. So you do not have to be bogged down just because AI is mentioned. So you do not have to mention the different aspects of AI, the machine learning tools and different things. The pattern identification, how is that done in AI? That is not what is to be discussed in this paper. Just because of artificial intelligence is mentioned, it doesn't make it the question of GS3. So just because Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is mentioned here, that doesn't mean the question of GS2. You have to relax. You just have to use the concepts that you have done in this paper. That is it. Because this question is the question of this paper, nothing to do with GS2. So we will not be looking into the specific provisions as you ideally do in GS2, but just the idea. So they may ask this and that in relation to current affairs, technology, some laws or some ideas of governance, some international conventions. That does not change fundamentally the way you write the answer to a paper. Nevertheless, with this understanding, the idea of justice I already has given you in the previous discussion, and this PPT will be shared with you in the comment section. That has changed. Justice, rather than being retributive, has assumed the proportion of being restorative. For example, emphasis on community service and compensation to victims. This aligns with the idea of karma, the principle of karma, because the question says that based on Indian culture and ethos. So every part of the answer must highlight as to how the new ideas of Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita having these principles, they are fundamentally based on Indian ethos and culture. That has to be highlighted in whatever you write. So, side by side, I'm giving you the Indian idea and how possibly the Indian idea would have inspired the new idea of justice, enriching it. So, the idea of justice becoming restorative, the idea of justice becoming victim centric rather than offender centric. So, it is not crime and punishment, rather, it's crime and restoration of the ideal balanced state. For example, some of the provisions of the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita aligns with Indian ethos of Sarva Jana Hitaya, welfare of all. For example, enhanced provision for victim compensation. Similarly, rehabilitation of the offender. That is the idea of Vasudev Kutumbakam. That is the idea of compassion of Bhagavad Gita. Compassion is the root of all dharma. So the whole world is one family. That is Indian ethos. And with that Indian ethos, there are provisions of skill development, education programs of offenders. There are also some provisions or alternative to imprisonment for certain minor offenses. That is restoration of the offender. That is changing the idea of justice. Similarly, there are measures for some preventive measures for the crime, like community policing, and it has adopted a holistic approach, addressing the socio-economic factors which leads to crime, and that may also be considered while giving the punishment for the crime. So this is changing the idea of justice from being offender centric to being restorative, to being victim centric, to being restoring the balance and holistically looking at the crime with modern understanding of psychology and also considering the socio-economic factors for crime. So that's how, with Indian ethos, the idea of justice has changed. But the question has three sections: justice, equality, and impartiality. So some of the provisions that you have picked up, if not the section, but the ideas, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is a major thing in news. Anyways, you must have covered that for GS2. So some of the fundamental ideas, you can use them without necessarily mentioning the sections and provisions. Like uniform application, standardization of laws across the country. This is one of the things that Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita has brought in with little changes, with inconsistencies that were there in the previous laws. Unified definition of offenses applicable nationwide. That is equality. The idea of gender justice, enhanced focus on crimes against women. Expanded the definition of sexual offenses in the new law. So that is leading towards equality and equity. Similarly, you can talk of some provisions of impartiality, like fair trial provision, strengthening the due process, and completing the trial in most of the cases within 90 days. Evidence-based approach, it has allowed for new forensic tests as well, making it more scientific and fair. So that addressed the main body of the question. The main challenge in answer writing, as you must have gauged by now, is to answer the question in toto. Address all the parts, not just writing on justice, equality, and fraternity, but based on Indian culture and ethos that has to be there. And this shift also must be very reflective as to how we have shifted from the doctrine of punishment towards the progressive idea of justice. So that's the main body. Towards the conclusion, of course, you will write some challenges as well and some prescriptions. For example, this shift is not just the shift of doctrine actually. This shift is also the shift of mindset. So adequately, you require certain education program, training program for the masses and for the civil servants. You require change in attitude to look at justice not to be punitive or retributive, but to be restorative, to restore the balance. And that would require change in outlook, change in value system, change in education level. That will require training. So when the shift is there externally, shift must also be there internally in terms of attitude. With attitude, we are inclined always. Attitude is inclination. If we're already inclined, the whole system is inclined towards one idea of justice that has to shift towards a new idea of justice. So that internal shift also must happen. That you will write in the prescription that I have written here. After discussion of every question, if any doubt remains in your mind, you should feel free to ask. The real understanding, of course, will develop when you actually write the answer and get that evaluated. We are moving to the next question, the Indian culture and value system. In Indian culture and value system, an equal opportunity has been provided irrespective of gender identity. The number of women in public service has been steadily increasing over the years. This is a contextual statement. There is no directive of question, discuss, comment, anything like that. So you will not elaborate on this. Actually, you will write very succinctly, very concisely comment on it, but do not elaborate the statement. You can write that in Indian culture and value system, an equal opportunity has been provided from time immemorial. There were Gargi and others who contributed in making of the Rigvedic hymns. So participation of women in lawmaking, participation of women, their contribution in Rig Vedas, that is recorded. So equal participation, equal opportunity, fair equality of opportunity has been there. And number of women in the tertiary sector, number of women in service sector, number of women in public service have been increasing. Examine the gender-specific challenges faced by female public servants and suggest suitable measures to increase their efficiency in discharging their duties and maintaining high standards of probity. There are two parts. We'll deal with both of them one by one. Examine the gender-specific challenges. As says, it's a very open-ended question, but the challenge in general studies is the questions are very open-ended and general. But it becomes very difficult in that sense, that how will you address the question? How would you know that you have completed the demand of the question? If you start listing down challenges, you can mention more than 50 challenges that can come one by one sequentially in your mind without a break. You can mention many challenges. But the question is, how should you be framing your thought process and how you should be structuring your answer in mentioning the challenges? So because you always have to remember which paper are you in right now. You are writing the answer to the question of which paper. This is ethics paper. So somehow, when you write the challenges, the theories, the syllabus of ethics must reflect in your answer. You can write many administrative challenges. You can write many psychological challenges as well. You can write certain economic challenge, some sociological challenges. There could be many kind of challenges. So there has to be a system. There has to be a methodology to write the challenges. I have come to develop this idea from the second chapter of your syllabus, attitude. In attitude, there are three parts: cognitive, affective, and behavioral. And basically, these are the three things that controls a man. That in the last discussion class, we have talked about some of the quotations. One of Gandhiji, that man is but the product of his thought. What he thinks he becomes. We'll be discussing this in the context of the quotation of Immanuel Kant given in the question paper. That even if you think something wrong, think of doing something wrong, that must also call for punishment. You are guilty even when you think of something wrong. So in that context, we were discussing the importance of thought. And there I reminded you of the second chapter that thinking, thoughts, cognition is an important aspect of attitude. And attitude is what precedes behavior internally. Behavior stems out of attitude. So man is controlled by his thought because thought develops cognitive part of attitude, which largely controls behavior. So the three things that controls a man is cognition, affection, and the rules, procedures, the controls, the commands, external things that controls behavior directly. So cognitive aspect, affective aspect, and the behavioral aspect. This is what is the control. So if anything good is happening, it is happening because of broadly these three things. And if any restrictions or any challenges are stemming, then they are stemming from these three things. If you think like this, you will be able to write quite good of an answer, and you will know that that is also complete. So what challenges? You can list down endless challenges. But if you broadly mention 2-3 points and 3 headings, that will be very, very complete challenges. So the way I'm mentioning challenges here, that you will have time enough to read also later on, because I'll give you this PPT. There could be challenges based on cognitions. Cognition means your thoughts, your information that you carry, the knowledge that you have, the wisdom that you possess. That's all thought. Your belief, your thoughts, your reasoning, your knowledge, your information, they all are constituted in the cognition. Things which are relatively free from emotion. They are called as cognitive aspect of our faculties. So in the cognitive faculty, we have thoughts, we have beliefs, we have reasoning, we have also imagination, memory, experience, we have wisdom, we have knowledge, information. That's a cognitive aspect. So there could be cognitive challenges faced by the female civil servants. For example, the stereotyping of the gender role that comes from the thought process. Now, since people possess that thought, that itself is a challenge for any person living in society. Any person, if there is something wrong with the thought process of society, that itself will bring up some challenge for people. So, gender roles, stereotyping, belief that certain roles are masculine and they must be given to male, females are too soft for them for decision making in law enforcement or finances, etc. So your thoughts that decides that causes biasness, stereotyping, also leads to prejudice. That your belief, your cognitive bias in evaluation. When you use your reasons, reasoning is done under the umbrella of thought process. So the interpretation to the results that you get from reasoning, that is done by your thought process. Your thoughts actually decides the way that you will do the reasoning. So cognitive bias in evaluations, unconscious bias is there in performance evaluations, and that is also a challenge. The confirmation bias. The problem is that women starts to conform to this cognitive bias that society or organizational structure can may possess, and women internalize these cognitive stereotypes, affecting their performance. So they self-doubt in the traditionally male-dominated fields. There is also affinity bias. People generally tend to favor those who are like them. So, in recruitment, in assigning the jobs, in promotion, basically people try to favor people who are like them. And if the system is already male dominated, that male dominated system will favor the dominance of male, the continuance of the male dominance. So, the male civil servants will be favored. These are the things that you will not write in GS2, but these are the things you have to write in this paper. You cannot just be writing external things. You cannot be just writing external challenges, which you have to, but internally, initially, first you have to mention the internal challenges. That's how this paper becomes strikingly different from GS paper 4. Otherwise, if you do not take these things into consideration, you will end up the writing pretty much the same. Those points you will write in GS2. The case studies and many of the questions, open-ended governance type looking questions, are for most of the students, they are of the nature of GS2, which is not right. That's not right. Absolutely wrong. Since this paper has been created over and above GS2, it has a certain demand. And that demand has to be fulfilled when you write certain things over and above GS2. So the internal aspect has to be written. Whenever you write an answer, it has to be written in the shade of the syllabus. Syllabus has chapter of attitude that has to reflect in your answer. Syllabus has chapter on emotional intelligence that has to reflect in your answer. Syllabus has topics of conscience, aptitudes, values that has to reflect in your answer. So that is cognitive biasness. And that is also a challenge imposed by cognitive bias. Challenges can come because of affective bias, because of the affective component, because of emotions, because of things related to emotions. Overt presence of emotions or lack of things like lack of emotional sensitivity, moral sensitivity, lack of emotional intelligence, emotional labor burden, expectations for women to manage others' emotion at workplace, pressure to always appear pleasant and accommodating. That puts the emotional burden on the female civil servants of crowd management, etc. There is empathy gap, lack of empathy. Empathy is a virtue which is very rich in emotion, very, very rich. Empathy is the value that enables us to connect with others, to feel the pain and suffering of others. If there is empathy gap, what's that? That is an affective challenge related to emotions. And that also has to be, that's different than cognitive challenge, things related to emotion. There are challenges of fear and insecurity, women feeling unsafe or uncomfortable in male dominated work environment, anxiety about speaking up, anxiety to be assertive, that may backfire, emotional exhaustion, stress, and constantly navigating gender based challenges. There is burnout, but there is lack of empathy in the system, and that is effective challenge. Once you're done with the cognitive challenge and the affective challenge, then you can go to the challenges related to behaviors. And they are external things. And that's very familiar to you from your GS2. Overt discrimination. Discrimination with regard to opportunities, discrimination with regard to pay parity, with regard to assignment of the task, with regard to promotions, that is a challenge. Microaggression, that's also behavioral component. Subtle behaviors that communicate hostile or derogatory attitudes, or being dismissive, or being patronizing. That is also a challenge to get the leadership opportunity for the female civil servants. There is also a challenge of immoral actions like sexual harassment, sexual advances, creating a hostile work environment, using power dynamics to coerce, to intimidate. These things have got exposed in the Me Too movement. Exclusion from informal networks of the male civil servants, unfair distribution of work. These are the behavior related challenges. You can't write so much, of course, in the exam in 150 words, question, 2 page, space limit, 7 minutes, time limit. But I'm giving you a direction. I'm giving you categorization. If you can mention 2 points under the 3 subheadings, that will do. But you have to have a framework in your mind. You have to have a thought process. You have to have some concepts. And syllabus offers you many concepts: concepts of attitude, concepts of EI, concepts of conscience, concepts of normative ethics. They all give you a framework to approach the answer. And that way, paper become really easy. Otherwise, you keep on mentioning challenges after challenges, and there is no end to it. So if not this framework, you should have some other framework. But you should have a way to complete the whole. If you think in parts, if you think of internal and external, that is the sum total of everything. Behavioral component is external, and cognitive and affective component is internal. That completes the whole thing. When you write it like this, you have conviction that you have written the answer holistically. Then the second part is the ways and means as to how to overcome the challenge. If you have identified the challenges properly, you would know how to solve the problems, because the cognitive element cannot be solved by instruments of governance. So those are attitudinal problems of people, and attitudinal problems are solved by the techniques of persuasions. You know that different techniques of persuasions are required to fix the cognitive biasness, to fix the affective biasness of people, and you have to apply those techniques of persuasion to change the overall attitude. Now, regarding the external challenges, that has to be fixed by laws. That has to be fixed by code of conduct, code of ethics. That has to be fixed by external training. That has to be fixed by gender budgeting. That has to be fixed by external auditing. That has to be fixed by work culture. That has to be fixed by leadership. That can take care of external things. But the things which are internal, that requires a deeper alignment with the value system. Change in the orientation, change in the mindset, change in the thought process, change in the attitude. If you do not recognize that in challenge, then you will also miss that in the prescriptions. So that is how. It's nothing different than many other questions asked in the previous year's question paper. If they ask you what are the problems regarding the old age and how to fix it, they have asked so many times as to what are the mindsets of the older people regarding girls' education, how to change it. What is the mindset of the youth for not joining the politics? They asked in 2016 how to fix it. So basically, the challenge anybody face in the system will be stemming from three broad things, which are the three components of attitude. So people create problem in three ways: cognitively, effectively, and behaviorally. So there would be three kind of challenge broadly, and there will be three approaches to fix the problems broadly. This is basically fundamentally why I wanted to tell you through this question. And the things which I have told you in the prescription, that you can have a reading from the PPT that I'll share with you. Now, this is the last question in section A. Mission Karmayogi is aiming for maintaining a very high standard of conduct and behavior to ensure efficiency for serving citizens, and in turn, developing oneself. How developing oneself? In turn, after serving citizens, you will develop oneself. This is a quote of Gandhi. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So when you serve citizens, in turn, you develop yourself. The path to moral development and salvation goes through others: service to others, empathy to others, tolerance to others, compassion to others, impartiality for others, justice to others. When in those ways you serve others, that is also the process. Side by side, you are developing yourself. Practitioner of ethics is also the beneficiary. So one who do it also develops himself or herself. Let me read it once again. Mission Karmayogi is aiming for maintaining a very high standard of conduct and behavior. So what is this? Conduct, standards, that's ethics. So Mission Karmayogi is aiming for development of ethics in administration to ensure efficiency in serving citizens. That's public service. That's fulfilling the social contract. That is trusteeship. And in turn, developing oneself. Developing oneself meaning development of moral character. Awakening of your soul, development of your reasoning, development of your ethics, integrity, and aptitude. That's the title of the paper. The sum total of that is what is moral character. That is what is meant by developing oneself. Now read the question further. How will this scheme empower the civil servants in enhancing productive efficiency and delivering the services at the grassroots level? How will this scheme? The question has already told you what this scheme aspires to do. And then it is again asking, how will this scheme do things further? How will this scheme, meaning how will this that has been told about the scheme already, the scheme has to develop ethics and the scheme has to develop moral character. This has been told in the question. And then the question is asking, how will this scheme, meaning how will developing ethics and how will developing moral character further will empower the civil servants in enhancing productive efficiency and delivering of services at the grassroots level. I do not know in your first reading if you really got what the question was. This is not a new question, and just because Mission Karmayogi is mentioned somehow, that should not create panic in you because you haven't gone through the scheme properly. It doesn't make an iota of difference whether you know the detailed provisions of Mission Karmayogi or not. Provisions are given in the question. Question is telling you what the scheme has to do, and then it is asking how the scheme will further do the further thing. What further thing? Two things: become productively efficient in whatever the product you are developing, in whatever you are doing. What is a public servant doing? Public servant is doing public service. So in public service, in delivery of justice, in delivery of different kind of service, how will you be more productive? Number one. And number two, how will it make you more efficient in delivering the services at grassroots level? So how will the quality of service delivery, which is mentioned in the syllabus, will improve? So how overall you will improve in your efficiency in the products that you're delivering, and the grassroots service, how will that improve? How will that improve? Through this scheme. And what does this scheme do? This scheme develops standards, and this scheme develops the person, the civil servants. This scheme develops ethics in administration, your sixth chapter. That's where the sixth chapter begins from. And the development of the civil servants, aptitude in civil servants. That is your third chapter. So how will sixth chapter and how will your third chapter develop a thing mentioned in seventh chapter, which is quality in service delivery? बस यही है सवाल. मिशन कर्मयोगी से कुछ लेना देना नहीं है. So people after exam they were panicking and they were messaging, okay, how will we solve paper 2 questions in paper 4? Because Mission Karmayogi is mentioned, that ought to be in governance section of GS2. And because AI is mentioned, that ought to be in GS3 in science and technology. And because Bharatiya Sanhita is mentioned, so that ought to be studied in GS2. Now GS2 is coming in GS4. Not really. In GS4, it will always be GS4. GS2 will never come to GS4. GS2 will go to GS2. In GS4, you will always have GS4. Nothing to do with the provisions of Bharatiya Sanhita, nothing to do with the provisions of or the detailed of the मिशन कर्मयोगी. जितना चाहिए मिशन कर्मयोगी के लिए उतना उन्होंने यहाँ पे बता दिया है. मिशन कर्मयोगी is aiming for maintaining a very high standard of conduct and behavior, ethics, to ensure efficiency for serving citizens, and in turn developing oneself, developing one's character, developing one's aptitude, developing and strengthening one's integrity, developing one's virtue. That is developing oneself. अब सवाल है कि how will this scheme, meaning how will these two things that comes from the scheme will empower the civil servants in enhancing productive efficiency and delivering the services at the grassroots level. This you have to answer, and this is a fundamental question asked many times in PYQ. Meaning, how will character, how will integrity empower civil servants? ये अलग से पूछा है. How does impartiality and non-partisanship helps in civil service? ये अलग से पूछा है. Fundamentally, all the aspects of developing oneself and ethics in administration, वो उन्होंने पूछ लिया. अब उसको club करके they have asked how in general ethics in administration help. How does ethics help? Practicing ethics, being virtuous, how does that help? Fundamentally, that helps in development of trust. And trust, you know, is the source of authority. Old story, old story. I've repeated that in the foundation class, done so many times in PIP. You just have to sing the same song. That trust leads to moral authority, credibility, legitimacy. Authority means when you ask, when you want something to be done, that thing gets done. That is called as authority. Now you ask people to do something, they will do it. Why? Because they trust you. Why do they trust you? They trust you because you have high standard of conduct and you have developed yourself. You have reasoning ability, you have awakened conscience, you have sensitivity, you have EI, you're the man of character. Trust comes from transparency, accountability, probity, or to say ethics in administration. And it comes from ethics in administrators, and that is moral character. If there is ethics in administration and there is ethics in administrators, that is a source of trust. Morality is a source of trust. And when there is trust, people start listening to you. If people start listening to you, will you be productive? Of course, you will be productive. Why? Because with this trust in moral authority, you will be productive by development of your social capital, power of persuasion. With power of persuasion and social capital and good relation now that you enjoy, you will develop cooperation. For example, cooperation in accepting of the new law, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Does that make system as more effective? Of course. Any new initiative comes, people are ready to cooperate. New laws come, people are ready to cooperate. That helps in development of consensus for taking major leap forward. For example, one nation, one election. That is what government is throwing this idea. That requires consensus. Development of consensus becomes easy if you are trustworthy. Does that make you productive? Of course, yes. Cooperation will also help you reaching to the grassroots level. Cooperation will help you in participation of the private sector, crowding in of private sector. Cooperation with others will help you in participation of the civil societies. That will help you expand your reach. That will help you expand in your efficiency. The investment from the private sector will start coming in. The expertise from the civil societies will start coming in. That will help you take the model of governance at the grassroots level. So with this comes reform, and ultimately society improves. This is a simple idea of the sixth chapter, third chapter, and seventh chapter. And this is part of your understanding of the course on ethics. This is nothing new, nothing new. The real intelligence you have to apply in the exam hall is to look thing which is very basic, but they are wrapped up in the new cover, new packaging. In every year's question paper, the same thing is wrapped up in a new packaging. You have to open up the package and look at the same old things. And then you're on your way in 5 to 6 minutes to write the complete, good, enriching answer. If you read it again, you will realize that exactly what the question was saying. And this is something that is known to you very, very well, how exactly quality service improves and how the service delivery at the grassroots level improves, because you do that in the topic of quality of service delivery. That is there in the seventh chapter. So the proper answer with examples I'll give you when I share the PPT. But this is the broad idea I wanted to discuss. This is how you have to think. This is really a static paper, trust me. Your paper change हो ही नहीं सकता. लोगों को लगता है कि कभी ऐसा आया कभी वैसा आया, ऐसा नहीं है. पेपर हर साल एक जैसा ही आता है. ये बेवकूफ़ी है लोगों की, वो सोचते हैं कभी ऐसा है पेपर, कभी वैसा है, कभी टेक्नोलॉजी बेस्ड है, कभी स्टैटिक है, कभी करंट। कुछ करंट स्टैटिक नहीं है इस पेपर में। पेपर पेपर एथिक्स के जैसा ही है, एंड एवरी ईयर द सेम थिंग कम्स इन क्वेश्चन पेपर. You got to realize that. That is it. Any question before we move towards the case studies? You want to ask something at this stage before we start with the case study section? So in that case, we will move to the first case that they have asked. I do not know if you have read the case already or not. For the benefit of those who haven't read the case, I will read the case quickly. You stay with me, you be with me, and try to absorb the case, what the information from the case, if you have not read the case already. There is a technological company named ABC incorporated with the second largest, which is the second largest worldwide, situated in the third world. So this is an incorporated company, second largest worldwide, situated in the third world. And then it has to face the problems of the third world. You are the chief executive officer. Your position is that of CEO, and you are also the majority stakeholder of this company. The fast technological improvements have raised worries among the environmental activists, regulatory authorities, and the general public over the sustainability of this scenario. You're also the largest stakeholder, so that will entail some responsibility. And your tech company is raising alarm bell among the activists, among the regulators, and also among the public regarding the sustainability of the technology that you are using. What is that? They will tell us later. You you confront substantial issues about the business's environmental footprint. In 2023, your organization had a significant increase of 48% in greenhouse gas emission compared to the levels recorded in 2019. The significant rise in energy consumption is mainly due to the surging energy requirements of your data centers, fueled by the exponential expansion of artificial intelligence. You know, of course, because of huge amount of processing, huge amount of electricity is used in many of the technologies, like also in blockchain technology, also in Bitcoin mining, in processing generative AI like ChatGPT and others. They also use a huge amount of electricity for processing it. AI powered services need much more computational resources and electrical energy compared to conventional online activities, notwithstanding their notable gains. There is gain, but there is also a price that we pay for these gains. The technology's proliferation has led to a growing concern over the environmental repercussions, resulting in an increase in warnings. The AI models, especially those used in extensive machine learning and data processing, exhibit much greater energy consumption than conventional computers tasked with an exponential increase. Same thing they are repeating. Basically, energy consumption has increased. That's a problem. Although there is already a commitment and goal to achieve net zero emissions by 2030. Commitment by whom? I assume there's a commitment by your company. They do not write it very clearly. Although there is already a commitment and goal to achieve net zero emission by 2030, the challenge of lowering emissions seems overwhelming as the integration of AI continues to increase. To achieve this goal, substantial investments in renewable energy use would be necessary. The difficulty is exacerbated by competitive environment of the technology sector. Competitive environment meaning the margin of profit is less. And that's how it explains the previous statement, substantial investment which is required in renewable energy use. You might not able to put into investment that amount of money because of the competitive environment of technology sector, where rapid innovation is essential for preserving market standing and shareholders worth. So you yourself have need in developing technology related to your own tech rather than renewable energy. To achieve a balance between innovation, profitability, and sustainability, a strategic move is necessary that is in line with both business objectives and ethical obligations. Now, there are 4 questions. Like last year, they have added more than 3 questions. Previously, there used to be 2 questions, 3 questions. They have asked 4 questions. That makes case study very lengthy. That means you have to be very fast. That means you have to work with a framework. If you don't have a framework, ready-made pointers, coordinates, it's very difficult actually to answer the questions in time limit. What is your immediate response to the challenges posed in the above case? What is your immediate response? First of all, this is not a new way of asking question. They have asked in the previous years as well, what will be your response? There are many case studies. If you go back in the previous year's question paper, they will ask, what will be your response? They have asked responses many, many times. And I've explained you in the class earlier that response here does not mean what will you do externally. That is behavioral response. They come back to the second chapter. There are 3 components of attitude, and there are 3 kind of response that you can have. If the problem arises and you keep thinking about it, you are still critically thinking about the problem. Are you responding? Tell me. It's a simple question I'm asking. If a problem comes in your hand and you're thinking about the problem, will you consider that as a response? Are you responding or are you not responsive? Well, since you do not seem to be answering, so you're not responsive. So in that case, I can say that you're not responding. But if a person is thinking of a problem, then he is responsive. He is responding to the situation. So response doesn't mean that when the hands and legs are moving and you're walking and you're talking and you're discussing and you're making some strategy, only that's not the response. If you're thinking about it, that's also the response. That is cognitive response. And if you're trying to do some thought experiment to feel something, to feel the problem of others, to experience something, imagination of that in your mind, to experience a scenario, that is also response. That is effective response. If you develop motivation, meaning if you increase the level of emotion in you, that is leading to motivation, preparing you inwardly to do something, that is also response. That is also response. The mistake here, what students do, they will write only external things. They will merge GS4 with GS2. That's wrong. Response is cognitive response as well. Response is effective response as well. And response is behavioral response as well. But that is immediate. Should not be mediate, meaning reasoning should not come so much. So you do not have to think long and deep because that is immediate, or maybe in a instinctive way or in a short term. What will you do? That is the question. What will be your immediate response? The course of action, they will ask later. Measures है ना वो fourth part में पूछा उन्होंने. Being a conscious person, what measure would you adopt to maintain balance? अब यहाँ पे you can write many things, but what will you write? What is the difference between response and measures? Measures necessarily would be largely external. Response could be internal as well. यहाँ पे तो दोनों पूछा है. Previously, in the questions, they used to ask one of them, what will be your response? So here it's very amply clear that what they are intending to ask. Response, when you think, that's response. When you examine your belief, that's response. When you gather information, you do reading, you read surveys and data, that's response. When you're trying to link things up, trying to gain knowledge, that is response. When you wonder what you will do as a consequence of something, you apply your wisdom and experience, that is also response. When you apply your emotion, your motivation, when you develop sentiment for people, when you feel the pain of others, when you show empathy, that is also response for this paper. Right? The thing is that case studies people generally write with the feel and in the flow with whatever they know. And they think that the theories that they have done, that is for section A. That is absolutely wrong. The theories that you have done is for both section A and section B for case studies as well. So when you write answers to case studies, that should reflect the syllabus, that should reflect understanding of the subject. And if you do not think that response is cognitive and effective as well, that you haven't understood the subject at all. You haven't understood the idea of Immanuel Kant that we discussed in this paper. UPSC has asked this. Even if you think of doing wrong, you are guilty. Thinking is such a powerful thing. Thoughts are important. Thinking something is also responding. It has to reflect in the answer. Point is that there has to be cognitive response, effective response, and behavioral response. In cognitive response, you have to think. Think of your duty towards the stakeholders. Think of your duty towards the environment. Belief. You have to develop the belief, examine the belief of your responsibilities, and believe that innovation is needed and innovation can solve the problem. When you do the evaluation, when you're thinking, doing the critical thinking, when you're applying logic and reasoning to analyze a situation in immediate term, that is also a response. All these are cognitive response. When you are facing a problem, you're thinking about it, you're applying your reason and your logic, you're evaluating, you're analyzing, you're examining the beliefs, you're applying your wisdom to look at the consequences. All these are response, and you have to do it when you face the problem. These are effective response when you show your moral concern, when you show your empathy, when you feel the pain, when you feel the ethical, the responsibility for the whole industry, when you feel that you're the CEO of the largest registered company, the second largest, you have to feel the ethical weight. You have to feel responsibility as an industry leader. You have to feel the pain of suffering of others. You have to show empathy. You have to feel motivated to take the challenge and solve it. That motivation, that feeling, that empathy, that sentiment, they all are effective response. Hope will also come and as a part of emotion. They all are effective response. Once you are cognitively ready, once you are effectively ready, then you are ready. You are behaviorally ready as well, and then you can do things. Otherwise, without this orientation, without the development of attitude, you're not ready yet. So if you say that I'll do this and that and this, it's not going to work. It really doesn't make sense. You will not be ready to do all these unless you are ready inwardly. If you're ready inwardly, if you're cognitively and effectively ready, you can also give a behavioral response, like immediate action plan, initiate comprehensive energy audit, establish a sustainability task force, communicate transparently with stakeholders, collaborate with environmental experts, accelerate investment in renewable energy and energy efficient AI research, do some policy reform, develop ethical leadership. But these are external things, of course. But why will you care? Why will you do these things? Because you feel it, because you have thought about it. That's why. Because you are cognitively ready, because you are effectively ready, so you will be behaviorally responding as well. You understand? That should be your response. You will not, of course, write everything because there's so much to write, and that too within 250 words, there are 4 parts. But I'm giving you broad categories. What you can generally write under each category is writing 2 points under each category will do. That will suffice. But that's how you have to write. In immediate term, you will have to do this. The second part of the case is discuss the ethical issues involved in the above case. This is the pet question of UPSC. UPSC asks ethical issues every year. Every year, in at least 3 cases, they will ask ethical issues. You generally understand and the meaning of the word issue. Issue means things which are of concern. Like, for example, there's a crack in a highway, and you travel on road below that highway, or you use that highway flyover. Suppose there's a crack in a flyover or in one of the metro pillars. You will be concerned. Is that an issue for you? Yes, that's an issue. Has anything happened? Has anybody died? Has the metro pillar collapsed? Has the flyover collapsed? Yet? No. Yet nothing has happened. There hasn't been any damage perceivable, but that is still an issue. Correct? That is still an issue. So it's not actually the real damage. The hazard, the risk is also an issue. The same goes for ethical issues. Ethical issues are scenarios where the standards of ethics are violated. And what are the standards of ethics? You have done that. That is the second question of this question paper. Dimensions of ethics. Remember, the second question asked about the dimensions of ethics that influence human behavior. And in those dimensions of ethics, we have done. They are the standards of ethics. Normally, the normative ethics, they are the standards of ethics. And we did 8 of them. Rights, we did virtues, justice, rule of law, deontology, duty-based ethics, common good, utilitarianism, consequentialism. They are the standards of ethics. If they get violated, virtues get violated, you're not honest, you're not upright, you're not empathetic, tolerant, compassionate, anything violated, any virtue getting violated, that is an issue. Rule of law getting violated, that is an issue. Not doing your professional duty, that is an issue. You're not working for common good, you're violating the integrity, impartiality of lack of fairness and opportunity in the working of institutions. Institutions are not working as common good. That is an issue. So violation of an ethical standard, if that happens, that's an issue. Number one. But even if the violation is not happening, but it is at the risk of happening, cracks have come in. Work culture is not healthy. When that, what will that lead to? That will lead to violation of duties very soon. So not a healthy work culture. That's a risk factor. Absence of code of ethics. That's a risk factor. Absence of ethical training. That's a risk factor. Absence of leadership. That's a risk factor. Absence of EI. Risk factor. Absence of sensitivity. Is a risk factor. All these are issues. So when your standards gets violated, or when your standards are at the risk of getting violated, then that is ethical issue. And it's a pet question. They ask you so many times, so many times in the same question paper, and they ask year after year. That is something that you should get along with properly as to how to be efficient in writing ethical issues. So if you have the normative ethics in your hand, you can write the ethical issues very fast. You can write from the issue of rights. In this case, the issue of environmental rights. There is a question of justice. I have given you the idea of justice in the previous discussion. Today also we have discussed in that question. Remember, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, a major shift from the doctrine of punishment to the idea of justice. Justice means balance. Justice means synthesis. So if the interests are not getting balanced, how does it get balanced? By impartiality, it gets balanced. By fairness, it gets balanced. So if there's failure to balance interest of shareholders, environment, and society, there's a lack of balance in the system. That is the issue of injustice. Issue of justice, that is injustice. So these are the standards, and you have to show how standards are getting violated or how standards are at the risk of getting violated. That will create ethical issues. One way I have used many standards. Yeah, I won't be reading it out, but that is the idea, and that's how you go about writing ethical issues. So if any standards of ethics, any normative ethics missing in the context of the case, that's an issue. If you do not have aptitude, sensitivity, reasoning, EI, consciousness, leadership, which nurtures ethics. If aptitude is missing, then ethics will not get nurtured. Ethics will die out. So lack of aptitude is a risk factor for ethics. That is also an issue. So if you do not show foresightedness, if you do not show imagination, innovation, creativity, leadership, you don't show sensitivity to certain issues. And that's a risk factor. That is also an ethical issue. So in nutshell, what is ethical issue? Absence of ethics, absence of integrity, absence of aptitude, which is the title of your paper. That is ethical issue. That's a big issue. You should be concerned about these. So that I have listed down. You don't have to write so much. You do not. Writing 4 to 5 will suffice, especially when there are 4 parts in the case. Then the third part of the case is your company has been identified to be penalized by technological giants. Now, I'm not very clear on this, how the technological giants are going to penalize your company. But anyhow, since they have written, your company has been identified to be penalized by technological giants. What logical and ethical argument will you put forth to convince about its necessity? About what necessity? About your company's necessity, about your company's using that technology, that necessity. Basically, this is what I understand from the question. The language is not very clear here, but that's what we ought to understand. How will you convince to not penalize your company, and how would you convince that the technology, your company, are important? They must continue working. In what way? The question uses 2 words: logical and ethical argument. It's very intriguing that they have used the word logical because we have been using that in our understanding of reasoning. Logical, do you understand the meaning of the word logical? What is logic? Logic is when you go from step 1 to step B without taking a jump. That is logic. That is really logic. If you say that the 2 lines are parallel and then you say that they will meet at infinity, in foreseeable space, they will not meet. That's logical. Because the second statement coming out from the first assertion. The conclusion is completely coherent with the premise. If the lines are parallel, then they won't meet in the foreseeable space. So if I say if I make arguments, and the arguments, they are linked up, they are coherent, If I start with a premise, and after that, every argument I have made that is coherent with the previous argument and hence coherent with the premise, so the final conclusion is completely coherent with the initial premise. That is logical. If I take a jump and whatever I'm saying now doesn't seem to be coming out from the previous arguments and the original premise, then I have become now illogical. So when people talk and when they say something that doesn't seem to be stemming out from your previous conversations, what we are talking about is unrelated, unconnected, then you go like, man, you're being illogical. That is what logic is. Logic imply coherence. It implies interconnectedness in arguments. And that is element of reason. So logic itself is one aspect of reasoning. Not completely that defines reasoning, but it's very important aspect of reasoning. So to be logical argument means a rational argument. Logical is necessarily rational. Logic is an element of rationality, but there are other things in rationality. But if you say logical, it is rational. Logical argument means a rational argument, and according to Kant, what is rational is moral. So rational argument and ethical argument. But here they have used the word logical, and so you have to highlight coherence in the argument. Connecting two, three things together, that is logical. And using ethical principles in general sense, that will be ethical. So the answer, the way I've given you, is to combine these two things. Combination of ideas, connections, and ethical principles. That will be answering this logical and ethical argument together. For example, moral progress. AI advancement fulfill our rational duty to progress human knowledge, aligning with Kantian ethics. You can align this idea with any idea of salvation or enlightenment. Any idea. Man's search for meaning of life, man's advancement of knowledge, man's inclination to seek the truth, a Platonic idea or existentialist idea, or the idea of salvation in the Buddhist idea or from Hindu philosophy. Any idea of enlightenment asks man to seek knowledge, to seek the truth, to know more. So what I've done here, I've linked two things. Advancement of AI, that's one thing, logically linked with other things, with ethical principles of Kant or any other enlightenment principle. So the moral progress or any principle that is ethical argument. And linking two, three things together, that is logical argument. If you can do both of them together, you will aptly answer exactly the question as it has asked. You will hit the nail on the head. So you should not try it out doing it separately. That logical argument different and ethical argument different. Ethics necessarily is logical. What is rational is moral. That's a claim of Kantian philosophy. So it's not a good idea to segregate them. Rather, you should work things out together. There are other arguments that I can give you, like utilitarian argument for innovation. Short-term emission increase can be balanced out by AI's potential to solve greater environmental challenges, and that will align with environmental ethics. So you can put the ethical argument of environmental ethics, ethical argument of utilitarianism, and the logical argument of AI development and its potential of solving the challenges. There's logic and ethics, rationality and reasoning together. That's how it should go. You can give other arguments like ethical economic balance. Economic balance based on ethics. Our growth contributes to economic justice, morally aligning with fairness principle or social justice. Similarly, there are other arguments I've given you, but my aim was to explain you how you should go about giving arguments. So this you anyway cover when you talk about the importance of artificial intelligence or in the dimensions of ethics. When you do applied ethics, then you do the technology related ethics. You do the importance of it. So if you have that part of your notes with you, you can directly use that part of your notes to highlight the importance of AI. When you highlight the importance of AI, you have to highlight it in an interconnected way, talking of two or more than two things, and in the light of ethical principles. That is the strict demand of the question. Many a times what will happen when you come out of the exam hall, you will feel that your paper has gone really well, but you will not clear mains that year. It may happen. Rather, it will happen to many of you. The problem is that when you answer, you have to necessarily answer as has been asked. Not because you write anything that will fetch you marks. You have to answer strictly according to the way that the question has asked you. And for that, you have to understand what the question is asked. So you have to have a very good grasp over the content and over the understanding of the question. And then finally, you can write what they are really asking. There's a fourth part in the case. Being a conscientious person, what measures would you adopt to maintain balance? What is balance? That is justice, meaning to do justice. To maintain balance between AI innovation and environmental footprint. Now, when they ask you measures, I'm telling you, I'm giving you an insight as to how to write answers when you have to write measures. When you have to write measures, then you have to write things what you will do on ground. That is necessarily external things. Okay? But what will you do on ground? That has to be guided by things which are in the sky, meaning the forms have to guide the substance. Remember, there's a question in this year's question paper that mindless addiction to forms, wo nahi hona chahiye. There should be in sufficient consideration of substance as well. As well, both has to go side by side. Mindless addiction nahi hona chahiye forms ka, but forms are important. You have to look at the ideal things, and you have to take the contextuality also into account, the context also into account. But ethics is both universal and contextual. So from there, we learn that we have to have focus on both of them. We have to be Platonic as well as Aristotelian. We have to have form as well as substance. UPSC has used it very intriguingly. That's a little technical thing. It shouldn't have done it, but anyway, UPSC has used form with capital F and substance with capital S. So there's a literary meaning, specific meaning of those forms and substance. But I'm giving you an insight that is also the way you write the measures. When you write the measures, you have to write an ideal thing, meaning a principle that you will implement. Then the substance, things which are on the ground, how exactly in a particular context you are going to implement those principles. For example, accountability could be the principle, RTI could be the substance. The principle, ideal thing is accountability. Moral accountability could be the form, RTI could be the substance, citizen charter could be the substance, audit could be the substance. So with these three specific things, you are implementing an ideal thing, accountability. All right. So when you write the measures, do not just write this and that and this. I will do this, I'll do that, I'll do this, I'll do that. In doing this and that, what ideal thing are you trying to implement? It goes hand in hand. So the form and the substance both must come when you have to write the measures. So what measures? What measures? You have to be imaginative. That's an aptitude. That is a measure. Innovation is a measure. But what innovation? Like, for example, ethical AI innovation lab. You can suggest anything from your common sense. You'll focus on this in developing energy efficient AI algorithms and sustainable computing practices. Algorithm tells the pathway for calculations, and efficient algorithms can make the software very efficient. There are some softwares of 4 MB work very fine, and sometimes you have to download the software 60 MB, 80 MB, sometimes 150, 200 MB, the bigger softwares. But like software like Zomato and Swiggy, they are very big. Facebook, they're huge size. The other softwares, they can be very efficient, but since they're not collecting too much of data and they're not bothering you with too many things, they can be of smaller size, 10 MB, 15 MB. The thing is, the algorithm decides what computational work it has to do and accordingly what energy it will be consumed. So the energy consumption can be reduced by the development of more efficient algorithm. That is what innovation. You know that you have to do innovation, but you have to write exactly what kind of innovation. That's form and substance coming together. That is the model using which you should write the measures always. Whenever they ask measure, this is the form in which you should be writing the measures. Environmental stewardship. These are the principles: stakeholder engagement principle, accountability principle, circular economy principle, awareness principle, collaboration, decentralization principle. These are the principles, and then I've written specifically how will you implement the principles. Like environmental stewardship, comprehensive green data center program, transitioning to renewable energy sources. That is what you will do on ground. For stakeholder engagement, sustainability advisory board. These are just suggestions I'm giving from my side. You can come up with these phrases and suggest certain things that you will do on ground. Accountability, annual AI environmental impact report. Write some suggestion like this. If you do that on ground, then you will implement the ideal of accountability. Circular economy, this is an idea, but how will you implement it in this context? Tech recycling and upcycling initiative to minimize the e-waste. For awareness and education, AI and environment education programs for employees, partners, etc., etc. Industry Sustainability Alliance for collaboration. So, so you come up with a principle that you have to implement, and something, some procedures as to how on ground it will be implemented. So, form coming with a substance, that is a good way of writing results. So, that would answer the fourth part as to how will you balance them out. Now, we are going to the second case. I'll read out the second case as I read the first case, and I'll read slowly so that even if you have not read the case earlier, now you will grasp what there's in the case. Raman. Raman is a senior IPS officer and have recently been posted as a DG of a state. Among the various issues and problems, challenges which needed his immediate attention, the issue relating to recruitment of unemployed youth by an unknown terrorist group was a matter of grave concern. It was noted that unemployment was relatively high in the state. The problem of unemployment among graduates and those with higher education was much more grave. The problem of unemployment. It's a grave problem. Thus, they were vulnerable and soft targets. In the review meeting taken by him with senior officers of DIG range and above, it came to light that new terrorist group has emerged at the global level. It has launched a massive drive to recruit young unemployed people. Special focus was to pick young people from a particular community. The said organization seemed to have a clear objective of utilizing or using them for carrying out militant activities. It was also gathered that the said new group is desperately trying to spread its tentacles in his state. A definitive or a reliable intelligence tip was received by the state ID and cyber cell that IT and cyber cell that a large number of such unemployed youth have already been contacted by the terrorist outfit through social media and local communal organizations and other contacts. The need of the hour was to act swiftly to check these elements' designs before they assume serious proportion. Discreet inquiries made by the police through the cyber cell revealed that good numbers of unemployed youth are very active on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. On an average, many of them were spending 6 to 8 hours each day using electronic devices and internet. It also came to the light that such unemployed youth were showing sympathy and endorsing the messages received from certain persons, allegedly the contact person of the global terrorist organization. Their social media accounts reveal their social affinity to such groups in as much as many of them started forwarding anti-national tweets on their WhatsApp and Facebook. It seemed that they succumbed to their to the ploy of the terrorist organization, started propagating secessionist ideology. Their posts were hypercritical of the government's initiative policies and subscribing to extreme beliefs and promoting extremism. Everything is fine here except for this line. Their posts were hypercritical of the government initiative and policies. Except this, there is no problem in the case. Being hypercritical to the government policies and initiative, that cannot be clubbed with terrorism at all. It should not be. I do not know why UPSC has used this line. Otherwise, the whole of opposition, they are extremists and they are terrorists. Their posts were hypercritical of the government's initiative and policies, barring this. Subscribing to extreme beliefs and promoting extremism, of course, that is wrong, and the rest of the details of the case are fine. Now, the question is, what are the options available to Raman to tackle the above situation? What are the options available? That's the first part. what measures would you suggest for strengthening the existing setup to ensure that such groups do not succeed in penetrating and vitiating the atmosphere? What measures would you suggest? अब जो options आपके पास हैं उसमें से ही measures आएंगे. The question is what options are available. So once you identify certain options, they are the things that are your options. Those are the things that you can do. Those are the things. Some of them are the things that you have to do. So the measures will come from the options. In above scenario, what action plan would you advise for enhancing the intelligence gathering mechanism of the police force? I'll give you the options first, and depending on the options, we will see the measures. The options, see, in this kind of scenario, broadly, there are three group of things that you can do. One is to decapacitate the terrorist organization, take away their capacity. That's one part. The second thing you have to do is put your house in order. Like there is a problem of unemployment, there's a problem of secessionist tendencies, there's a problem of extreme views people are holding, there's a problem of getting influenced too easily, there's a problem of the youth being misguided. Put your house in order. Once you have done that, and once you have taken care of the enemy outside, then you have to ensure that there are systems in place to not allow such a threat to pose, assume serious proportion later on. Or such threat should not come into your house later on. There should not be a threat anymore. So regulatory mechanism, safety walls should be there, though that is a third level of thing that you have to. Logically, these are the things that you can do. So the options available is to show immediate response, preventive response, and you can have aggression or counter attack on those terrorist organizations. Intelligence-led preventive action. This is the one thing I can do. Multi-agency coordinated response. This is to decapacitate the terrorist organization. This is one group of things. The other group of things that you have to do is community engagement and de-radicalization, to put your house in order. Socio-economic interventions, solving the problem of unemployment, especially for the graduates and postgraduates, where people become more restless, and they're also intelligent and educated, so the capacity to cause harm is even more. That is the second group of things that you can do to put your house in order. Now the third group of things that you can do, that you will write in measures, long-term measures, is to have regulations in place, is to have safety walls in place. When you have problem like this of a serious proportion, these are the three areas from which you have to write. Broadly, kuch bhi karoge, it will lie in the one of the three categories. So the first question is, what are the options? Option is to be responsive, immediate, show the reactionary measures to the problem and go after the terrorist organization in neutralizing them. So that is one category of options. Second option is to focus inwardly. So basically, these are the two possible options to act immediately on immediate terms. But when they ask you in the second part, what measures would you suggest for strengthening the existing setup to ensure that such groups do not succeed in penetrating and vitiating the atmosphere in the state? For that, your house has to be in order. People have to be very, very strong in their moral fabric. There has to be fraternity and brotherhood. There has to be national sentiment. There has to be values of patriotism. You have to put your house in order so that such groups do not succeed in penetrating your house and vitiating the atmosphere of your house. So यहाँ पे जो दो options मैंने दिया in immediate level, वही होगा long term measures with a third thing, to have some regulatory measures. So the measures that you will have will be these three. First, that you show retaliatory measures to neutralize the terrorist organization and take away their capacity, decapacitate them. That you can do by enhanced intelligence framework. You can do by robust legal mechanisms as well. So the two things that I have mentioned already, those two, that is there in the previous slide, and the regulatory measures which are mentioned here, like specialized counter-terrorism units, institutional integrity, like stricter regulations for social media platforms, state-level advisory councils, including diverse stakeholders for the social media, so that the misinformation or radicalization do not happen to the social media. Ethical leadership and governance, socio-economic reinforcement, developing employment. Developing employment using technology that will not be necessarily costly, but making people content creators, not only content creators, job creators, helping them in developing their entrepreneurial skills, handholding, and helping them becoming entrepreneurs. Using technology, you can create a lot of jobs, make them coders. They can code and make them develop applications and softwares. You can work from home and do without investment, without large investment. You can do a number of things using technology. So you have to do that. You have to do community engagement and empowerment. Develop a network of community where people can license, the leaders can liaison to bridge the gap with the law enforcement that can help in community policing, which is the third part of the case. How to gather intelligence on time. Long term societal immunization from the radicalization process. That will come from developing the ethical and moral fabric. So, when they ask what measures will you adopt, the measures would be these three. These three are the broad things. These three are your options, and when you elaborate on them, they become the answer to the second part. These three will be the measures that you will take to decapacitate the threat outside, to put your house in order, and third is to put the regulatory measures in check. Put advisories and guidelines for social media, have the provisions of community policing, have the provisions of reducing the gap between the leaders and community leaders and the law enforcement and the youth, etc., etc. Strengthening the moral fabric. This is your defense. This is your best defense. This is your immune system that will keep the system healthy. यही measures adopt करना है for any kind of problem, whether it's radicalization, Naxalism, terrorism, or the problem of separatism, successionism, the problem of crisis management, the problem of for disaster as well. You have to work on these three areas. Now, the third part of the case is, I'll give your answer properly. Overally, I've told you you have to club it in the third part. When I give you the PPT, I'll give you the proper segregated answers for each part. The third part is, the third question in the case was, in the above scenario, what action plan would you advise for enhancing the intelligence gathering mechanism of the police force? To enhance the intelligence gathering, really it's not the people on ground that you should be very familiar with. It's not the incentive to the people. It is not just to have your men on foot. This is a paper of ethics. And in the paper of ethics, you have to focus both inward and external things, outward. You have to focus on both internal things and external things. So, in the above scenario, what action plan would you advise for enhancing the intelligence gathering mechanism? And this mechanism has to do something with the internal things as well. It has to do with social capital. It has to do with good relations. It has to do with the trustworthiness. It has to do with the virtues like patriotism, like fraternity, having common sentiment, having emotional intelligence to understand the consequence of the action that you are engaged in. So it will require many things. It will require many things I have mentioned here, both inwards and outward. So you can have certain things externally, like you can have, like Maharashtra government has, human human intelligence, that is termed as human intelligence strengthening, that involves community policing, that involves informant network refining, to train the informants, to give the informants code of conduct, to give the informants ethical framework. So how exactly they have to work out, to give them training as well, interagency collaboration, that's also work on ground, that in that enhances human gathering of intelligence. And Maharashtra government has done it very effectively in counter acting against terrorism. You can work with open source intelligence enhancement, like advancement of analytics and artificial intelligence. You can work with integrated data management. You are increasing your capacity, that's open source intelligence, using artificial intelligence, using digital technology. You can work in the cybersecurity upgrades. You can work with deep and dark web exploration, where most of the transactions using cryptocurrency happens. So you can follow the money trail easily if you can have access to what's happening in the deep and dark web. So this is enhancing your capacity technologically. This is enhancing your capacity through information gathering through your digital technology. This is enhancing your capacity of gathering your intelligence through human capacity. And there will be ancillary things like capacity building and training, specialized intelligence units, dedicated units for cyber security intelligence, gathering cyber intelligence, counter radicalization, ethical intelligence gathering, code of conduct for intelligence operations, capacity building of the institutions. There is a very important thing that you integrate this idea with society as well. Cultural competence, training in cultural sensitivity and community engagement of the officers. Encourage language skills relevant to the potential threat groups. Social capital and community engagement, trust building initiatives that could be at various levels, youth engagement program, maybe mentorship of some of the at risk youth by or a group of them by some of the officers that would help them to not fall prey of the radicalizations of initiatives of the terrorist organization. Protection of whistleblower, both by the system and by the society. That would also help in gathering of intelligence. International cooperations and the ethical oversight and accountability. Accountability of the intelligence gathering system officers themselves as to how they are doing it, whether they're doing it with set norms or not. All of it together will enhance the capacity of gathering intelligence. That's how comprehensively you have to write about things which are internal, regarding trust, regarding community engagement, regarding sensitivity of the at risk youth or at risk community or at risk groups, and the external things, of course, your cyber tech capability and your institutional capability, your international cooperations, etc., etc. That largely is what you will be writing in anything. But since this is ethics paper, internal aspects also has to be highlighted. That is it. Once you get this orientation, things becomes quite easy. Otherwise, you end up writing an answer like GS2. Now we will discuss the third case, and this case is on a difficult side. In a sense that the dilemma of this case is little on a heavier side. I'll read the case out quickly. Please be with me in order to grasp what the case is about. With multi-pronged strategy of the central and the state governments, especially in the last few years, the Naxalite problem has been resolved to large extent in the affected states of the country. However, there are a few pockets in certain states where Naxalite problems still persist, mainly due to involvement of foreign countries. Rohit is posted as a special operation for the last 1 year, as SP for a special operation for last 1 year in one of the districts which is still affected by Naxalite problem. The district administration has taken a lot of developmental works in the recent past in the Naxalite affected areas to win the hearts and minds of people. Over the period of time, Rohit has established an excellent intelligence network to get the real-time information regarding the movement of Naxalite cadres, to instill confidence in public and have moral ascendancy over the Naxalites. A number of cordons and search operations are being conducted by the police. Rohit, who himself was leading one of the contingent, got a message through his intelligence source about 10 hardcore Naxalites. They were hiding in a particular village with sophisticated weapons. Without wasting any time, Rohit reached the target village with his team and laid out a foolproof cordon and started carrying out a systematic search. His team managed to overcome all the Naxalites along with their search. During the automatic, there is some problem with the text here, but what it means that it has overcome. He has, with his team, overcome the Naxalites who perhaps were carrying the automatic weapons. However, in the meantime, more than 500 tribal women surrounded the village and started marching towards the target house. They were shouting and demanding the immediate release of insurgents since they are their protectors and saviors. Demanding immediate release of insurgents. How many are there? There in the case that there are 10 of them. 10 of them, 10 hardcore, about 10 hardcore Naxalites were hiding, and they are demanding the immediate release of insurgents. Why? Since they are their protectors and saviors. That means there is vacuum, absence of poor governance. The situation on the ground was becoming very critical as the tribal women were extremely agitated and aggressive. Rohit tried to contact his superior officers, the IG of the state, on the radio set and on the mobile phone, but failed to do so due to poor connectivity. Rohit was in great dilemma since one of the Naxalites apprehended. Two, two, two were not only hardcore top insurgents with prize money of 10 lakhs on their head, but were also involved in a recent ambush on the security forces. So two of them are hardened criminals. However, if he did not release the Naxalites, the situation could get out of control since the tribal women were aggressively charging towards them. In this case, to control the situation, Rohit might have to resort to firing, which may lead to valuable loss of lives of civilians and would further complicate the situation. Of course, if you fire, it will further complicate the situation because it is written here, very important point, since they are the protectors and saviors. It is unfortunate. It is really unfortunate that the tribal women, considering the Naxalites as the protectors and the saviors, perhaps they are the protectors. They are the protectors and the saviors. Why? Because the government machinery perhaps is missing. In this delicate situation, where there's absence of trust, there's absence of social capital, there's absence of good relation between the government and the citizens, if you do firing and there's loss of life, that will definitely complicate the situation. And that will erode whatever little the social capital is existing, and that will make it very difficult to carry out intelligence and search and operations against Naxalites later on. So, what are the options available with Rohit to cope up with the situation? We will come to that difficulty as to decide as to what Rohit should do. But before that, there's no difficulty in putting out the options. Like, what are the options? Options would be number one, that you let the Naxalites go, which you will not choose, but you can give that as an option. Number two, that you dig into your heels and you take the tough stand that you're not releasing anybody, come what may. If it comes to firing, maybe you will resort to it. Number three, you start negotiating with the women leaders and see what the result of the negotiations are. If they agree to some degree, then you can release partially two of the Naxalites who are not hardcore, keeping the hardcore core ones with you. That you can do as the part of the negotiations. On for development of goodwill, you can also say that due process of law will follow on these Naxalites, and if they are innocent, then they will go scot free. You have to win the trust in that negotiations. But if the negotiation fails, if they say no, and they are not even ready to for negotiations, then you can try retreating from that area. But it's difficult because it's written that they have surrounded. That means there is no way to go. It's not that you can take the Naxalites and run away from the contacts of the women, from their hold, and you can take away and you can retreat somewhere, and then meanwhile the reinforcement can come, and then you can handle the situation accordingly. That seems less likely because you are surrounded. You can't take the Naxalites anywhere away from the women. So in that case, things would be difficult, very difficult. But generally, these are your options: release all the Naxalites, retreat from the captured, with the captured Naxalites, retreat somewhere. But that seems difficult because you are surrounded. Stand firm and refuse to release the Naxalites. Negotiate with the tribal women leaders to buy time and seek more reinforcement. As a part of negotiation, what can happen is release some of the less significant Naxalites while retaining the two high value target. But if the negotiation fails and you really do not know what to do, then you can use non lethal crowd control measures to disperse the women protesters. That could be your another option. Now you tell me, all of you, what should you go with? Should you go with stand firm, option 3, together with use of non-lethal crowd control measures, option 6. So you can go with 3 plus 6, one side. Or you can negotiate and you can release some of the less significant Naxalites. You can go with 4 plus 5. What seems more suitable to you? 3 plus 6 or 4 plus 5? Four and 5, Omkar. Anybody with 3 plus 6? There are 4 parts in the case. What are the options? I have given the options. What are the ethical dilemmas being faced by Rohit? I'll give the dilemmas. Then the third part of the case is, which of the options do you think would be more appropriate for Rohit to adopt and why? Which of the options? You can choose more than one option. Which of the options do you think would be more appropriate? In the present situation, what are the extra precautionary measures to be taken by the police in dealing with women protesters? That's a separate part. So I'll give you the dilemmas and then we will reach to the options. And then they also have asked why. You have to give your reasons as to why you're choosing a particular set of options. The dilemmas that Rohit is facing could be many. I've mentioned some of the dilemmas like law enforcement versus public safety. Strictly whether you have to enforce the law or you have to work things in accordance with the maximization of welfare and not allow more casualties, especially those of women leaders and women, preventing potential harm to the civilians. Balancing these two out is difficult. That is creating ethical dilemma. Short-term peace versus long-term security. Immediate de-escalation if you release some of them. But that will hamper the long-term. That will hamper the short-term peace because if you release them, but long-term security will always come from solving the socio-economic problems, as we have seen in the previous case. The unemployment of youth, the case clearly identified, was the problem, and that was making them more gullible to the to radicalization. So if the government doesn't have social capital, as long as people feel that Naxals are their protectors and their saviors, Naxalism can thrive. That is the root cause. Long-term sustainability will come from winning the trust and social capital. So you want that, you want all of them around 12, all of them. That will lead to short-term security, short-term peace. That's a dilemma. Duty versus empathy. It's your duty to perform the task of arresting all those Naxals diligently. It's also your empathy to understand the perspective of the community leaders, the community perspective of these women. That is creating a dilemma. Individual judgment versus chain of command, making a critical decision without superior guidance. That is another thing that is in dilemma. That is creating dilemma in the mind of Rohit. Truth versus transparency, the implication of any decision on public trust and the ongoing counter-insurgency effort. If the information comes out that you have had any coercive measures while this counter-insurgency operation, if you be transparent or not, you have to be truthful. That's part of your civil service values. But being truthful and being transparent, if that is creating a problem in overall task of developing social capital and good relations, that would be a dilemma as to whether you have to practice that or not. These are some of your dilemmas, but coming to the third part, that is most important. What will you do? Now here in case studies, there is no right or wrong answer. And really the marks are not given based upon how right you are, because you're not being recruited to become a philosopher or a thinker. So the exact nuances of the moral argument, that is not to be checked. Rather, you are being recruited to become an advisor. An advisor should be a generally aware person and should have merits and demerits. That is what you have to tell to the political masters, and they have to take a final call, of course, with your expert guidance, advice. So you should generally know as to what are the merits and demerits. That's why they ask the merits and demerits in the case to be written. So you have to know how to argue. The arguments for your stand, what fetch you marks, not the stand. You can go with the other two options, but I'm going with this option of that you negotiate. Because it's there in the case that the Naxals, they appear or they are considered by the tribals as their saviors, their protectors. And that has to be changed. How does that change? How will social healing happen? Social healing will happen through sensitivity. Unless you show sensitivity to their concerns, they are marching and they're demanding. Unless you listen to the demand, unless you talk, unless you negotiate, and the social healing will not happen. If social healing does not happen, then in this pocket of the state where the nationalism is still thriving, it will continue. Rather, it can further expand its tentacles. So you have to talk. You have to talk. You cannot take the tougher part and not negotiate, and you are ready, more than ready, willing to use a lethal weapons. If the negotiation fails, if suppose, that could be the option as a last resort, but that should not be your preferred option. That is not the instinctive first option. That shouldn't be. First option should be healing people, healing society. The bureaucracy must always appear as virtuous and caring. Civil servants must also act as a trustee. Trustee means caregiver. You have to act as a caregiver. You have to act with an empathetic human touch, especially in scenarios like these, because it is a relative sense of deprivation. It is a disconnect that the Naxals actually prey upon, at any terrorist organization prey upon. So you have to remove that. Disconnect will be further enhanced if you are not talking. So the most appropriate option would be the combination of negotiation and strict action. There has to be an attempt to negotiate with the tribal women, release some of the less significant Naxals to win the gestures of goodwill, retain the two high valued targets who were participative or the mastermind for the ambush, but ensure to the people that you will have fair treatment and you ensure them of the due process. This is what I suppose should be done. If this fails, if this fails, then you can go with using the non-lethal weapons. Of course, as a last resort, violence is justified if the end is moral and just. As a last resort, but that should not be the immediate first thing that you write in the answer, that you are not ready to negotiate and you take the hardened stand and you will be ready to use non-lethal weapon as well. You should not reflect that in the answer. That will not be good. That will not be good. If you see the tone of the question, if you see the nuances and the sentences, they tell you where the pressure points are. They tell you where the critical points are. They tell you what the problems are. So to understand that accordingly, you should solve. But I'm telling you, if you take the other stand and give proper justification, you will still get the marks. There's no unique way of addressing the dilemmas. You can answer in more than one way. Remember the philosophy of Jainism, Anek Kantavad. There could be more than one truth. So it's all about arguments and it's all about the content from theory that you present in the answer that fetch your marks. They ask why. What is the rationale? I'm using the rationale of moral sensitivity. In one of the questions, UPSC, we have done some questions in section A. Since in other questions in section A, we are in the last class discussion. Since its dilemma is huge, I'm showing you clues from this year's question paper. These are the questions from this year's question paper. Question 1B was explain the key dimensions of ethics that influence human action. Dimensions of ethics. And when you decide in a dilemma like this, you have to touch upon some of the dimensions of ethics. See, this question 2A, the statement was, it is not enough to talk about peace. One must believe in it, and it is not enough to believe in it. One must act upon it. You must act upon the path of peace. Negotiations, developing social capital, good relation is the path to peace. This is what the question is suggesting you. The concept of just and unjust is contextual. This question says that what you have to do, that depends upon the context. What is the context? People are concerned. Women are willing to give up their life. They're putting themselves on the line, dealing with the security forces. They're showing so much of courage. Why? For what? Will you not understand that? Will you not consider that? Will you not negotiate and talk? That is the context in which you are standing. That's the context where Rohit is standing right now. Unless you take the context into account, you cannot grapple, understand, deal with the concept of just and unjust. That's what the question paper is telling you. Question paper is telling you mindless addiction to form, ignoring the substance of the matter, results in rendering of injustice. ये क्वेश्चन पेपर बोल रहा है आपका. Mindless addiction to form. So if you go with rule of law, if you go with the procedure established, if you go with the precedents, if you go with the ideal things, that's mindless addiction to the form. The presently what is happening, that is substance. And then the question paper also uses the phrase perceptive civil servant. And in the discussion in the first class that we had the day before yesterday, we talked about what is perceptive civil servant. Who is perceptive civil servant? Who can perceive? Who is a sensitive? So you require sensitive civil servant. You require doctrine of justice. You have to have a major shift from doctrine of punishment to doctrine of justice. We discussed this question. So where's the shift? You have to show that shift to balance, restoration, reform. For that, you have to do a lot more than just law enforcement. This is what we have discussed. This is what your question paper is telling you in black and white. This is what is to be done. So do that when you write the case. Do that. So I'm telling you, taking clue from there, my rationale is the moral sensitivity should appear. Moral sensitivity in the civil servants. A perceptive civil servant will show respect to the tribal community while still upholding the law. The concept of just and unjust is contextual. I'm taking things from the question paper itself. The situation ethics, considering the specific context of the tribal area. Aristotle's golden mean principle, saying that virtues are mean and ethics is moderation. Do not go to the extreme. Consider the things. Temperance is a virtue, a cardinal virtue, or one of the 4 cardinal virtues of Plato. Temperance, not going into the extreme. Aristotle has given too much of focus. He has said that practical wisdom, the Greek word for that is pronosis. The practical wisdom is the highest thing. Wisdom is to choose the most moral course of action in the given scenario. That is the wisdom. So that is my reasoning. That's why you have to do it, because that's the demand of the situation. Because this approach also balances the immediate de-escalation with long-term security. Balance is the idea of justice. That's where we started the class from. From the utilitarian perspective, to maximize the overall well-being and minimize the harm, you have to avoid violent confrontations, prevent the potential loss of life, while retaining the high-value targets. You do not have to compromise on that. The social contract says that the civil servants have to act as a trustee, become the caregiver. That's the contract. Now, you can't take care of people being harsh on them and taking their lives. You can't say that this is for your good, but immediately you have to die, but ultimately it will be good. That is not taking care. That is not taking care. That's not acting as a trustee. That's violative of the social contract. These are my arguments as to why you should be ready to negotiate. But it's a very contentious kind of case. UPSC has been bold enough to ask this case. Generally, UPSC doesn't put so much of dilemma in the case, but that's how I have answered it. Your answer can actually vary. You can go with the other options. Here, I have gone with negotiate and release some of them, 4 and 5. You can go with 3 and 6. You can stand firm. And then you can use a non-lethal crowd control measures as well. You can go with this as well. That will also be correct, trust me. If you can put on good philosophical reasons and you can give good arguments and fill the answer with theory, that will also fetch you marks. Then the fourth part of the case is, in the present situation, what are the extra precautionary measures to be taken by the police in dealing with women protesters? If you read the 4th question, you will have a clue for the 3rd question. What are the extra precautionary measures? You have to be very precautious. Then if you are taking precautions, how will you use the non-lethal measures? That's not taking precaution actually to that degree with women. So anyway, I think the question is giving you the hint. When they're asking you extra precautionary measures, they want you to be extra taking extra precaution when you write the answer for the third part. But in the third part, if you go with the non-lethal measures and being firm, that is not taking precaution. So when you are dealing with women protesters, what extra precautions will, the civil servants have to take? They have to take extra precaution in terms of being sensitive. Sensitive. Sensitive to gender, sensitive to language, sensitive to culture. Show the ethics of care, show empathy, demonstrate genuine concern for protesters' well-being, show respect for dignity, gender sensitive handling, unnecessarily don't mishandle. The female police officers should be at the front of interactions, non threatening communication, no advancement near their body physically if that is not required. That is respecting the dignity. That is one of the categorical imperative of Kant. Principle of least harm, principle of proportionality, transparency and accountability, maintain, document everything, maintain meticulously the details of all interactions so that you protect yourself from false accusation, and transparency also develops trust among the people as to how you have been dealing with the women protesters. And show that you are the caregiver, show that you're the trustee, fulfill and honor the social contract. And these are the general standards of principle. Whenever you follow ethics, integrity, aptitude, that is precaution enough. The precaution is set good standards of transparency, accountability. Precaution is show the ideas of integrity, show obligation, show dutifulness, show responsibility, show care, show that you are balancing the interest of all. That is integrity. And show aptitude, show sensitivity, show EIE, show reasoning, show leadership. That is aptitude. So what extra precaution? In this paper, ethics is the precaution that you have to take. Aptitude is the precaution that you have to take. That is extra precaution when you deal with women protesters. Basically, fundamentally, the thing is that paper is about EIE, ethics, integrity, and aptitude. For today, this is the last case that we will be discussing. It's a simple case, relatively compared to the previous three cases. It is relatively easy case, very easy case. Sneha is a senior manager working for a big reputed hospital chain in a mid-sized city. She has been made in charge of the new super specialty center that the hospital is building with state-of-the-art equipment and world-class medical facilities. The building has been reconstructed and she is starting the process of procurement for various equipment. Building has been reconstructed and she has started the procurement process for various equipment and machines. And you know the procurement process, according to Transparency International, is the most vulnerable section of the governance process. Huge amount of corruption goes on in the procurement process. As the head of the committee responsible for procurement, she has invited bids from all the interested reputed vendors dealing in medical equipment. She notices that her brother, who is a well-known supplier in this domain, has also sent his expression of interest. Her brother is also one of the bidders. Since the hospital is privately owned, it is not mandatory for her to select only the lowest bidder. In government, it is. Also, she is aware that her brother's company has been facing some financial difficulties and a big supply order will help him recover. At the same time, allocating the contract to her brother might bring charges of favoritism against her and tarnish her image. The hospital management trusts her fully and would support her decision, whatever it is. So there are three parts in the question. What should be the Sneha's course of action? As you must have easily identified, this is a case of conflict of interest. Whenever you have your personal relationship involved, whether you want to favor or not, if the person is in your bloodline, if the person is in your private personal relation, like friendship or anything, if that's a close relationship, that is a case of conflict of interest. On one side, you have public interest. On one side, there is the organization interest, the interest to get the best quality of medical equipment at the best price, the most competitive price. There's public interest. If the medical equipments are fine, the hospital will be able to render the service well. But on the other side, she feels it. She knows that the brother's organization is not making financially so well. And such a big order will help his organization recover. So there's a sisterly affection that might be there. And this is his brother is a very that's a close private relationship. So that creates a situation of conflict of interest. So the question is, what should be Sneha's course of action? Her course of action should be to resolve this conflict of interest. Although she is in charge and although the hospital will fully trust her and support her decision, whatever it is, although her organization is a private organization and she did not necessarily have to choose the lowest bidder, so she can easily choose her brother, but she should not. She should not choose her brother. The reasons are many, and that is what we are going to write in the second part. How would you justify what she should choose to do? So basically, they're asking how should one resolve conflict of interest? Number one. In the second part, they're asking why should one resolve conflict of interest? And in third part, they are asking in what ways conflict of interest is harmful. They're asking in this case, how is medical ethics compromised with vested personal interest? When you bring personal interest that conflicts with public interest, organizational interest, that is a case of conflict of interest. How is that harmful? How is that harmful to your profession, your organization, to medical ethics? So there are three simple questions on conflict of interest. How to resolve conflict of interest, number one, and what are the reasons for resolution of conflict of interest, and what are the ways in which the conflict of interest is harmful. UPSC has asked all three of them previously in PYQs. They are fundamental, basic questions of conflict of interest, very fundamental. So what should be her course of action? Her course of action should be to resolve the conflict of interest that she has come into. UPSC has asked previously that what is the procedure to resolve conflict of interest? And that is a very standard, that is very basic actually. Conflict of interest, this is what we have done in the QIP and foundation class. The procedure to resolve conflict of interest is disclosure. Once you have landed in conflict of interest, you have to disclose to the organization that, man, it may not be known to others because you are the boss, you are dealing with the process, others wouldn't know who has applied for bid. It has come to your notice first that one of the bidder, one of the person who has shown the interest is your brother. That information is known to you. So you have to disclose it to the organization, to the rest of the management, that this is the case. Because of this, you are recusing. So you disclose with transparency and then you recuse and restrict yourself from the new committee that will be set to look into the process. Do not interfere. So you recuse and restrict yourself. That is the second step. That is on the immediate level. But for the long term, you have to fix other things. You have to have ethics policies and you have to develop organizational culture that people are encouraged actually to do the same that you have done. There are clear guidelines for the people to identify conflict of interest. Training to tell to recuse when they are coming into the scenario of conflict of interest. You should not attempt. Never. You should not attempt to work with conflict of interest saying that I haven't talked to my brother for 10 years and that brother is actually a step brother and you had very rough childhood with that brother. So no chance you're going to favor your brother. That is not acceptable. Because even if that is the case, suppose that emotion doesn't come interfering into your decision making process, even if suppose your brother is the best contender, then you'll have to, based on objectivity and reasoning, now grant the bid to the brother. And if you grant the bid to the brother, in the eyes of the people, it will always be the case that there might have been some favoritism going on. And you will lose the trust, even if you were objective. That is not the way to work the organization. That's not the way the organization should be working. Organization works with trust. And whether public or private institution, there must be public trust. There must be propriety, there must be probity, accountability, transparency, there must be role modeling, leadership to develop good work culture. And if that goes away, then the organization in a matter of time will be steeped down into corruption. So there is no way in which you should be working with conflict of interest. So whenever conflict of interest appears, you have to resolve it. You should not be working with conflict of interest. So when the question is that what should be her course of action, her course of action is to resolve conflict of interest. So here, the course of action I've given. Course of action should be recusal and restrictions. Neha should withdraw from evaluating her brother's bid. Disclose that to the rest of the management. And a new procurement policy, restrict yourself. New procurement policy should set up. You should not interfere into the working of the new procurement policy. You can give leadership and vision to that committee because you are at a senior position. You can tell to the new committee to assess all bids based on quality, not just price, prioritizing patient care and safety. Your leadership and vision that can go to the new committee, but do not interfere with their day-to-day work. Then, in the long run, have ethics policies and enforcement. Establish a strong code of ethics in your organization. Do the ethical training of the people to identify the case of conflict of interest and effectively resolve them. Protect the whistleblowers, etc., who can raise the issues of conflict of interest later on. Prepare your system for future, taking the opportunity of this instance. Organizational culture, prioritize ethics, integrity, and public interest. These things. This is the course of action. This is a simple way of asking, or alternative way of asking, how to resolve conflict of interest. Now, the second part in the case is how would she justify what she chooses to do? What should she choose to do? They have asked in the first part. What should be the course of action? That is what she chooses to do. So justification. Basically, they're asking justification for your recusal. Why should you recuse? And why should you set another committee to work for this bidding process? What is the justification? Well, justification is related to the ethics and administration. It is related to integrity. Integrity is commitment to ethical decision making. Always do not violate the principles. Integrity is to work with consistency. So for the sake of integrity, you have to recuse. Why? Because it could be the case that there are moments of emotion getting overwhelming high on you, and that could be the moment of weakness. Do not allow that. Do not allow that. Do not do not get into a situation that create integrity risk. Don't do that. I gave you the example of a flyover having cracks. It must be repaired, or will you be comfortable with the crack being there and nobody doing anything about it? You don't take the risk. You do not take the risk. For the sake of integrity, you have to remove all the integrity risk. Conflict of interest is one of the major fundamental integrity risks. To protect the organizational integrity, to protect your personal moral integrity, you have to come out of conflict of interest. That's reason number one. You have to do effective conflict of interest management that prevents you have to show that you will both actual and perceived biasness in the procurement process. UPSC has once asked about the difference in the actual and perceived conflict of interest. So conflict of interest could be both, and you have to show that you have commitment for ethics in administration, and even the perceived conflict of interest, you're concerned about it. Public trust, this is the center of administration. Authority, moral authority, legitimacy, credibility, they all come from trust. If you people loses trust, the thing that the organization is corrupt, you cannot serve people. There cannot be any public service carried out. There cannot be any business carried out. Neither public nor private organization can actually work when there's a perception of corruption and there's mistrust. Public trust is a fundamental principle of public life. Fundamental principle. So when they're asking the reasons will come from ethical principles. To safeguard the ethical principles, to safeguard integrity, to enhance aptitude, you should do it. For ethical governance, for fulfillment of your duty, for the virtue of trustworthiness, for fair equality of opportunity. That's an idea of justice. John Rawls, procedural justice. To look at the consequence of not doing it or doing it, setting up a precedence for ethical conduct. So basically, I'm using normative ethics. I'm using some ethical principles. When they ask why, the why is answered by ethical or moral principles. So the question, if you remember, was how would she justify what she chooses to do? Basically, they're asking justification for resolution of conflict of interest, not dealing things with yourself, but asking another committee and you're recusing. And that's the justification to not put your integrity at risk and other things that I've written. The third part is, in this case, how is medical ethics compromised with vested personal interest? See, the question really is this, and we'll end with this. Carefully listen. The question really is this: when personal interest comes in, how does it mess with the situation? How does it become a slippery slope? How does it become thin edge of the wedge? How does it promote larger corruption when your personal interest comes in? In this case, how is medical ethics compromised with vested personal interest? So, if you do not recuse, the third part clearly says you have to recuse. If you do not recuse, then how will things go wrong? This is a case regarding a private hospital, so they're asking about medical ethics. Any ethics, any ethics, any ethics, the whole organization ethics, the whole organization culture will get compromised with vested public interest. How? This I've explained and I've belabored over this how in QIP and in foundation class as well. I'll bring you back to this slide, and that you will find familiar. The conflict of interest, actually, what it does is it creates integrity risk. So corruption and abuse of power becomes easy if or tempting if you're working with your personal interest. It creates moral hazard. It compromise on the role of a trustee. It does erode the trust. There is loss of power of persuasion, and then the problem goes on and on. But how does it all start? It all starts when in the organization in public life, if you bring your personal interest, then that personal interest starts conflicting with the public interest. And public life is all about public interest. The quote of Gandhi is, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Losing yourself in the service of others, that is what a man should be doing in public life. You should lose yourself in the service of others. So public service is a fundamental idea in public life. The meaning of administration, the word administration comes from the root word administrare, which means ad means to, ministrare means service. Public administration, the word administration literally means to serve. The meaning and the purpose, both of administration, is public service. So you have to do public service full-heartedly. That is why contentment is required per virtue. That is why you should be managing your emotions, negative emotions of greed. That is why you should be resolving conflict of interest. There should be full-hearted effort, dedication for spirit of service. Service is the only goal for a civil servant. The only purpose of life for a public servant is public service. उससे क्या होगा? If you ensure public service, then dues will be given to people. Justice will be rendered. And when you give justice, उससे क्या होगा? उससे ये होगा कि according to Aristotle, the ordering of society is centered in peace. Peace is source of order. And what we are trying to do with public administration is to create social order, peace, tranquility in society. When will that happen? That will happen when everybody gets their due. People are happy, their rights are ensured and protected. And for that, somebody has to work tirelessly, extremely hard to do that. And who are they? They are the administrators. They are the civil servants. Their job is to work only for public service. That's how the larger purpose will be met. But it's not that they are losers. It's not that they're not getting anything. They are also the winners, because you find yourself when you lose yourself in the service of others. So kullam kulli baat ye hai कि the public servant should not bring in their personal interest. Otherwise, their goal of public interest will get compromised. So what happens? What happens when you bring any personal interest? When you bring personal interest, you lose on your spirit of public service, because now you have two goals. Now you are a divided self. You have to work for public service, but you also have a personal goal. So your attention is divided. Your time, your energy, your money, your mind, everything is divided. So where's the spirit? Spirit will go down, of course. If the spirit of public service goes down, then your alacrity, your dedication, your enthusiasm will decrease. The level of innovation and creativity will decrease. You will become morally incompetent relative to your previous position where you had only one target, that was public service. And then you will start to hide things because you're not at your best, you know that. So you will create a system that will be less open. You will violate probity, transparency, openness. And when you do that, you will stop performing your duty as much as you should have. You know, they say that light is the best disinfectant and corruption breeds in darkness. When you start to hide things, because you have to ensure your interest as well, so you will not encourage probity, transparency, or openness. When the system starts protecting the perpetrators, then what will happen is you will not perform your duties. You're not still very corrupt. You're not steeped into corruption. You're not doing embezzlement of money yet. But whatever was expected from you, you're not doing. Coming late to office, you're not going to the grassroots level, you're not doing applying due diligence in decision making or auditing. You are not doing your duty. Why not? Because now you are divided. Because now you're also working for personal interest. So you're divided. So you can't work at all for public interest. So you will not perform your duty. It will happen. It will lead to non-performance of duty. When you're not performing your duty, what happens is leads to lack of fairness and equity. Lack of fairness because who is dependent on your duty? Who is dependent on you? People who are vulnerable are more dependent on you. So suppose as a father, if you stop working, who's going to get affected? Your family. Anil Ambani not getting affected, Mukesh Ambani not getting affected because then they are not dependent on you. So if the government officials are not working, who are the one who's going to be dependent? Who are going to be more affected? Weak and vulnerable. The middle class and the upper class, they're not using government services. They own their private vehicle. They do not use public transportation. They go to government hospital. They do not go to government public hospital. They do private hospital. They do not go to public hospital. Send their school to private school. Send their children to private schools. They do not send their children to government schools. They're not using internet services of the government. They're not using government service. So the government officials are not doing job. Who is going to be affected? Weak and vulnerable are going to be affected more. And that's against the principle of fairness. Principle of fairness says that the benefit and burden must be equitably distributed. The weak and vulnerable must get less burden. The rich and the businessmen and the strong, they should get more burden. That's why we have progressive taxation system. The rich are taxed more, the poor are taxed less. That is fair. That is fairness. But when you do not perform your duty, then that is against the principle of fairness because we will be burdened more compared to the middle class and the upper class. And then it so happens is that from this stage to not performing your duty, you actually go on to abuse your power because you have done away with transparency and openness. And that will develop complete moral corruption in the organization. It's not that you're not doing what is expected from you. You are now doing what is not expected from you. That is embezzlement of money. That is bribery. That is favoritism. That is nepotism. You are not doing that. How did you end up here? Because you started from here, having a personal interest. You started with conflict of interest. Had you not had any conflict of interest, had you not had any personal interest, then why would you do corruption? So it becomes a thin edge of the wedge. I'll bring you back to the question, what the question was. Question was, in this case, how is medical ethics compromised? With vested personal interest. And that is a roundabout way of asking, how does conflict of interest causes harm to the organization, to the character? How does bringing personal interest causes harm? So that's the issue. That explains as to how does the damage happen. I'll write down the explanatory answer. It was just the PPT we have used earlier in the class. I'll give you an explanatory answer in sentences as the answer for the last part. Now, so what is the conclusion? The conclusion is what Socrates has said. Socrates has said that the secret to life, does not lie in seeking more, but in developing the capacity to enjoy less. That is the conclusion. The conclusion is that you should draw your happiness from little things. As the song of Jagdeep Singh says, ये दौलत भी ले लो, ये शोहरत भी ले लो, भले ले लो तुम मुझसे मेरी जवानी, मगर लौटा दो मुझको वो कागज की कश्ती, वो बारिश का पानी. The happiness that a child has from working with, playing with paper boat, putting it on the rain runoff after the rainy season, drawing happiness from the little things, living a contented life. Contentment is a prerequisite for being virtuous. Virtue is service, virtue is empathy, virtue is justice, working for others always. And that happens when you have your limited requirement. And that is contentment. That is a conclusion. So you have to have contentment. You should not allow the public interest, personal interest to come in. If that comes in, resolve it, resolve conflict of interest. The only interest you should have is public interest. It was an easy question. They have asked previously in section A enormously. They have asked umpteen number of times in section A in PYQs earlier. This time around, they have asked in case studies that makes no difference in the content that will be used in writing the answers. Any question before we end the session? Okay, in that case, thank you very much for your kind, calm, patient cooperation. And in case you have any doubts, and in case you want to solve the last, you know what happens is that after so much of discussion, you must get some idea, and this idea has to get concretized. And if you're looking anywhere near yourself to clearing the next means, you should not just keep collecting ideas. You have to materialize that idea. So I'm leaving the last case actually undiscussed purposefully, and you can write the answer to it and submit to me for evaluation. You may not know me yet, but still you can submit it and I will give you the evaluation surely. The email ID is faizan.khan at the rate rausias.org. rausias.org. You can mail me here, and if you have any doubt, you can contact me. If you have written an answer which you must to give a logical conclusion to these two discussion classes, I'll give you the feedback. You want some hand holding in the initial stage of answer writing, we shall do that. Thank you very much. I'm ending the session here. God bless you, and may you do well in life.